fascinating story you told that I think everybody should really hear. You got a job with a company, and your job was to analyze the soundness or the investment worthiness of companies. And you came up with some data on a particular company, and your boss had a very interesting reaction to the data that you came up with. Can you talk about that story?
Okay. Yeah, I was a public accountant working for a major public accounting firm, and this was the first audit that I was being brought into to audit a publicly run company, and it happened to be a growth company, one that had prospects of growth and had a high price in relation to their earnings. So it was very important for that company to show continued growth in earnings. So I worked with this other person. This was my first audit of a public company, so there was a senior person and we were auditing the company, and we came out at the end, and we came out, okay, this is their earnings per share. And I brought this to the head of the company, and he just blew up. He says, there is no, we could put all sorts of expletives in there, whatever your imagination is correct, way that we're going to do that. That number would totally kill us, and it's wrong. And he kicked me out of there, and he called in the partner of the firm, the partner of the public accounting firm, who he had, hired to do them. So this partner came in, had a meeting with him, and I heard all sorts of screaming going on in there. And then the partner came out, and he came up to me and he says, Rob, this is what the earnings per share of this company is going to be. I said, but that's not correct. And he says, this is a public accounting firm, and you realize that the public accounting firms were created to protect the public, to ensure that, this is what I was taught in school that we were supposed to be doing, to ensure that their accounting records were conformed with generally accepted accounting principles. And so we were taught what the generally accepted accounting principles are, and we audit to see that what they did conforms to it. And he says, no, you're going to come up with this number. I said, but our whole job is to protect the public. And he says, no, our job is to keep the client. So they changed it. I had no choice. They changed what the numbers were, and then they signed off that this was what this company's earnings were, and they said that they conformed with generally accepted accounting principles. So that was my first learning and taste that may the public be damned. It's all about making money and keeping clients, and that may be what we were set up for, but that's not what happens.
When was this, so people could get a sense that, this didn't happen yesterday?
No, this was in 1974.
Okay. So, pre-bubble, pre-go-go years, at least from your experience with that one public accounting firm in that one episode, the system was already, I would call it criminal. I mean, misrepresenting.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if we go back in time, I'm sure there was just as much criminality throughout the 20th century, throughout the 19th century. I mean, I think this is as old as time, and it's just that there is a lack of understanding of the nature of power. There is a corporation, a corporate entity, a business. Their bottom line goal is to make money. The purpose of government is to counteract that there is a public good. And sometimes the public good needs to be upheld in the face of the needs of the corporation. And one of the biggest mistakes that was made was during the 19th century, corporations were given, unlimited life, and then in the 20th century, it was given the status of an individual, and it's not an individual, and it has rights that it should not have. And most of the problems we have today, economically, can be really laid on that mistake. Power that is created, that unholy alliance between business and government, how that has played out.
And just to be clear, it's not the government's job to limit profits, but it's the government's job, because theoretically the government is our representative, to limit corporations' activity and behavior. In other words, if they're engaging in criminal activity, like misrepresenting their numbers or destroying the environment or abusing employees or behaving like gangsters in the marketplace. That's where the government should be active, and that's where the government is woefully inactive.
Yes, exactly. One of the big bases of the Tea Party and where things has come is the work of Ayn Rand. She put up your corporate CEO as being a person of impeccable integrity, that they were brilliant, they came up with these great ideas, and that they were creating the wealth of society. And that then was taken forward. Alan Greenspan was one of her top disciples. And during his reign as Federal Reserve Chairman, every time they brought up the idea of trying to create some regulations to constrain corporate activity, he would say, no, they can self-regulate. There was this idea that they were moral and just. And the entire credit crisis that we have is totally based on criminal activity by, as we call them, the banksters. They destroy the economy, and you have people who created huge, huge crimes. Just to take one example out of millions, the person in AIG, the biggest the biggest insurance company, they were insuring these mortgages, these subprime mortgages, and they were getting huge fees for them. The only problem was they had no reserves to pay in case they wound up going under, which they did. So that would be like me saying, I'm going to insure all the houses in New York State, and everyone sends me, the premiums, the insurance premiums, and then if a house burns down, sorry, I don't have money.
Yep.
The government is there to stop outright breaking of law. And those guys, none of them went to jail. They wound up getting huge bonuses, huge salaries, and some poor guy who maybe has an ounce of marijuana on him, he'll get thrown in the clinker and be there for a long time. There's something very wrong in the way things are set up right now.
Exactly. We've got a so-called law enforcement system that is constitutionally, I don't mean U.S. Constitution, but I mean, from the point of view of its structure, it's constitutionally unable to prosecute massive white-collar crime, and yet it's completely, able to just pull people over, ransack their cars, show up at people's houses with SWAT teams, murder people. In the extreme. Throw people in jail for years and years for things that are barely criminal at all, if they're even criminal in the first place, and yet somebody who does the equivalent of stealing 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion, billions of dollars, just walks away scot-free. You can see the decadence even during the 80s under Reagan, and Bush, which was a pretty low time. It's all been a low time in our country's history, Clinton and Obama as well. But that people hold that up as a time of great greed and corruption. Well, at least somehow hundreds of S&L savings and loan bankers ended up in jail for their fraud, for their various frauds, and yet here we are in this late date, and not a single banker of any stature has received any kind of real serious investigation, let alone indictments or prosecution or trial. It's just really quite a system we've got.
No, it is. It's very interesting how that is playing out now, and it's also on an analogous, that in some way in the United States, all of this is happening and there is zero outrage. And this is very interesting and very important, because if you look at the United States now, what's going on with this, right now we're coming up to the deadline with the debt ceiling. And will the debt ceiling be raised? And the Republicans and the Democrats are supposedly fighting. But no matter what the outcome is, it is agreed upon. It is very clearly agreed upon that whatever solution comes out is going to be strictly costing those who are at the lower end of the economic system. The government is going to cut entitlement programs and expenditures, which are going to really hurt those who don't have, and they are not going to do the other end of the equation, which is increasing revenue, and see where they're going to increase taxes to help balance the budget. It's just through these cuts. And they're not looking at military spending. That's like totally off the table. There are so many things that are off the table. And if you look in Europe, and we had the Arab Spring, this year, people there are standing up, and yet in the United States, there is nothing. There is not a peep. There are a lot of people who are going to be hurt by whatever comes out of this terribly, and they are just furious at government, but mostly they are buying the very rhetoric that is going to financially bury them and bury the country. I mean, if you look at how things have changed in terms of the median wealth of families of different races, the changes have just been marked. Since between 2005 and 2009, we've had just a huge drop in the relative wealth between whites and non-whites. White Americans in 2009 have 20 times the net worth of black Americans. And if you go before the credit crisis, it was 11 times. So it has doubled in 4 years. And that gap between the wealthy and the poor just keeps on growing. And this is what this whole thing of, the default in Europe and the default in the United States, defaults going on all over the world is about. It's those who do have the power and the money. They're in a difficult place now. They can't just create money as they did in the past. So in order to continue their game and to continue their growing wealth, they want to take away some of the benefits, some of the policies that have helped to keep a floor underneath those who don't have. And I'm not saying that those programs did not have tremendous holes in them, and they weren't handled very, very poorly because they were. But the way things are moving forward, it's a very cynical movement forward that is going to create tremendous poverty in this country and in the world. And in Europe, they can see that to much greater extent in the United States. That's why you're seeing, and it's much played down, the riots in Greece, how the French go out on strike. You cannot do this with having everyone in the country sit back and the rest of the world the way you can here. It's very much, where we started out, the very basis of knowledge, the way things are determined, what is true, what is not true, has been so perverted that people aren't educated to know how to look at things.